Okay. Welcome. Thank you for being here. As I said, if anyone's just joined, there's a QR code on the screen if anyone wants to click on that. That's to download the accompanying workbook, but I did send that to you in advance, so hopefully you've got that already. If not, it doesn't matter. You can just, follow along or, make notes, however works best for you. Okay, so we've got about 30 minutes on this and then time for questions. Hopefully I'll keep on time. I've tried to time myself and it should fit well. But feel free to get up and move about. As I can't see all of your faces because I've ended up on my laptop, so I've got a small screen. So if you want to put your cameras on, that's great because when we get to the questions I can see you, but don't worry if you prefer to have them off. If you don't know me, so I know some of you, I don't recognise everyone on the call today, or if you're watching on the catch up, I'm Lauren Smythe. Hello. I'm an ADHD coach and I help busy professionals to make sense of their neurodivergence so life feels calmer, clearer, and more sustainable. I was diagnosed myself at age 41, nearly 4 years ago. And after getting my diagnosis, I was lucky enough to experience really transformational, and I'm always don't really like that word, but it is true, transformational ADHD coaching. And as a result, I decided to retrain and support others in a similar way. I'm not going to go on and on about myself, but that's a little bit about me. So today's topic, I know what to do, so why isn't it getting done? It's something that comes up all the time in so many sessions I have with clients and with people that I talk to about ADHD, and it is something that I experience myself as well. So what we're going to cover today, why I just need to do it doesn't work as a strategy. What's the reason behind what's actually getting in the way? So I won't know for you personally, but I'll give you some prompts to think about what might apply to you. So that's really important as we go through this quite generic, obviously what I'm covering in this kind of format, but have a think about how it applies to you personally. And then some practical ways to approach it differently. And if you know me and my style, you know I don't believe in kind of lists of hacks. I will be giving you some things for you to try. But there is also an emotional layer that we need to kind of explore as well. But I will be giving you some strategies to think about. So, you know what needs to be done? You've planned it and you're still not starting. You've got the list, you've thought about it, it's not even that difficult, and it's just not happening. This is where people usually land. You know, this happens a lot in my sessions with my clients. We'll talk through something, they'll make plans and action points, and as any good coach will do, we'll then kind of discuss what's going to help you or maybe, hinder you from actually doing it. And quite often the response I get is, well, I just need to do it. And on the surface, that sounds reasonable, yeah, but it just doesn't tend to work because next time, well, let's come on to the slide. Oh, sorry, wrong slide. The frustration builds, the pressure increases, and it becomes even harder to start. You get in this cycle, yeah, and it's really important to acknowledge what's happening here. This isn't just one of these, oh, okay, this is what happens. Like, let's think it through. It's not just an annoying pattern. You're actually making the task harder for yourself without even realizing it. Because that pressure and the self-criticism that you add just becomes another barrier. So in a way, one of the first things that helps is reducing that pressure. Yeah. That's the kind of biggest thing here that we need to come away with. I'm going to get onto that in a bit more detail in a minute, but I think it's really worth knowing that from the start. Has anyone seen this quote before? Let's make my thing a bit bigger so I can see your faces. Russell Barkley, have you heard of Russell Barkley? He's a doctor who's very prominent in the world of ADHD. Really does some really good research, really knows his stuff. But I just really like this quote, and it blows me away how true it is. It's not a disorder of knowing what to do, it's a disorder of doing what you know. So it doesn't help. You don't need someone to tell you what to do. You know what you're supposed to be doing. It's that you find it really hard to actually do it. And sometimes I think for me, like the knowing what to do is the frustrating bit. I think I know what I need to do. Why can't I just do it? So why does this happen? A quick sort of bit of context. Motivation isn't just about wanting to do something, right? It's what actually gets you to do it and to follow through. And dopamine plays a part in that. You're probably aware of that. Dopamine in ADHD brains is dysregulated, and that impacts motivation. I'm not going to go into that sort of neuroscience today. But the thing that I want you to know, that you probably maybe already do know, but that is motivation with ADHD brains is usually interest based rather than importance based. So what that means is even if you know something matters and you know it needs to get done, it doesn't always translate into action. Yeah. And as I said, for me, it's kind of one of the most frustrating parts of my ADHD. There's so much about my ADHD that I'm grateful for that really helps a lot of things. But in this sense, this is something that really frustrates me. So you can know it's important, but your brain just goes, nope, I'm going to do that shiny thing over there instead. Things with ADHD, when you've got an ADHD brain, things are more likely to happen when they're one of these things. All right. The pinch acronym could be quite helpful. I'm not sure about the H. I think it's they want it to say urgent, so they made it say hurry. But you know, stretching it a bit. But I think sometimes if you kind of want to kind of remember what these things are, the acronym can sometimes help. So they're more likely to happen when they're playful, in the sense of fun, right? If it's interesting, so it doesn't need to be something fun and exciting, but just be interesting, you know, that thing that you've got a hyper focus on. If it's novel, just standard for ADHD brains liking to chase the new thing, yeah. If it's challenging or competitive, so it might be a competitive with someone else, or it might just be, you know, competing against yourself about getting better, that kind of thing. Sometimes that helps. Or, as you're probably very aware, if it's urgent. And if the task that you're trying to complete doesn't have any of these qualities, your brain just doesn't engage with it in the same way. So knowing that, what we need to think about is not how do I make myself do this? Yeah, how do I force myself to do it? Or why can't I just do it? All of those kind of negative self-critical questions. We need to turn it into what's getting in the way of getting this done. So it's a completely different approach. So stop beating yourself up, stop trying to force yourself, and start thinking about what's the problem here? What's getting in the way? What do I need to do differently? And this is obviously not comprehensive, it's not the full list because, you know, we don't have the time for it, but I'm going to go through a couple of external blockers and internal blockers. So these are often the things that cause you to not be able to get that thing done that's on your mind. So the external ones are kind of like the practical ones. And I'd love it if you could share in the chat if you have any examples of others that I've not mentioned here. But some things that I think of that make it really hard to get something done. If it's boring, yeah. Boredom is the kryptonite for ADHDers. Yeah. If there's no urgency, if it's not kind of an impending deadline, then what do they say about ADHD? Now or not now? Yeah, it's either now or it's not now. It's just some other point. And until it comes to now, it's just not urgent. That's not going to make me want to do it. If it feels too big or unclear, so again, vagueness is really difficult for ADHD brains to manage, and we really need kind of more clarity on that. Or if it's not scheduled, if it's just sitting on a list somewhere. So I'm going to come to some ways to counteract those blockers in a minute, when we've talked a bit more about what the other things are. So none of these things are about your ability, about your intelligence, about, you know, your capabilities or any of that. It's just about how the task is set up. And then we've got internal blockers. All right. So these are things that are happening kind of inside of you, tend to be kind of more emotional responses to why something's not happening. And sometimes it's this, sometimes this. Oh, let's just let someone in. Sometimes it's the external and sometimes it's the internal. Sometimes, quite often, it's a combination of both. So the pressure I mentioned earlier, the pressure that we put on ourselves that we should be doing this, all you're doing by constantly talking about that pressure, by constantly telling yourself you should be doing it and why haven't I done it, is overloading your nervous system. And it just makes it so much harder to get going because your brain is concentrating on that issue. It's concentrating on the fact that you're not doing it and that you haven't done it and that again you still haven't done it and you said you would, rather than focusing on actually just getting the task done. Perfectionism. I mean, I've got some other resources about perfections, and if you want some more information on that, I can send it to you. But that's a real big one with ADHD. We just want it to be perfect, and that comes from, lots of stuff in the past and the way our brains are wired. But wanting to make sure it's perfect can actually be a blocker from even starting it. So if I can't get this exactly right, I'm not even going to do it, or I'm going to wait until I've got some more information, or I'm going to wait until I've got, lots more information before I can even get started on it. Self-criticism, again, I've kind of mentioned that in terms of the pressure, but by constantly being unkind to yourself, and I know that sounds a bit woolly, but it doesn't help matters at all, and it makes you kind of decide, well, I'm not going to do a good job of this anyway. There's no point doing it. And then a kind of, this is internal, but obviously is impacted by other people as well. But the RSD, so rejection sensitive dysphoria, worrying about what people will think. Yeah. So sometimes we just don't do it because we think, well, are they going to think it's rubbish? Or are they going to think, even if you actually think you're going to do a good job, might other people think that I'm showing off, or, worrying about what other people might think. And that hits so much harder generally with ADHD. Are there any other blockers, if you want to put it in the chat, or if you want to come off mute and let me know, is there anything else that you've noticed for yourself? And if you don't want to say out loud, it's fine. Maybe just jot it down because it's more important that you have it for yourself. But it'd be great if you could share. Anything, any internal blockers, things that make it harder kind of emotionally for yourself, or external blockers that make it really hard to get going on stuff? Anyone got anything they want to share? Let's have a look at the chat. There it is. It's being open. Hormones. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a really good point to remember, because um just being aware of your cycle and sometimes planning things around that actually can be really, really important. So thank you for bringing that one up. That's a great one. Something to think about for women anyway, or those who are affected by female hormones. Okay. I'll come back if there's anything else. But what we'll move on. So I do kind of keep repeating myself on this, and I know this comes up quite a bit, but I really want you to kind of this to be one of the main things that you go away with. If you're already frustrated or under pressure before you start, you are making it harder, not easier. Now, it's very easy for me to say that. Yeah, it's very easy for me to say, well, so don't get frustrated or under pressure. But the first point is kind of be aware that that's happening, and be aware that it's not helpful. And we'll talk in a minute about things that we can kind of maybe do to try and reduce that pressure. That's part of the strategy. Something that I do want to mention is that sometimes it genuinely is practical. So it might be like, I'm going to give you an example for me. I've been trying to write a book for nearly a year. Let's have a quick look at the chat to see there was another one there. Nagging, as soon as someone says to do it, I won't do it. Okay, that's a really interesting one that's been brought up there. That I think that's really, really common with neurodivergent people. And I think maybe what you're referring to is that I don't want to necessarily call it, but where you don't want to actually demand avoidance. And there's pathological demand avoidance, which can be kind of an actual kind of diagnosis within. It's usually within autism, but most people who are neurodivergent don't like being told what to do. So if someone's told you to do it, and then even it can happen to yourself. So if you tell yourself to do it, then you get annoyed with yourself for telling yourself to do it. So yeah, that's a good one to bring up. Sorry, I've just got distracted by the chat there. Well, I wanted to mention you this about the time, so go back to me. I've been trying to write a book for about a year, near on. And I made some progress at the start, and then I just haven't been able to get it done. But really, for me, genuinely, I've thought about this, and I've done the kind of beating myself up over it, and I've realized actually that's not helping. But genuinely, I don't have the time to do it at the moment. I'm so busy with so much else. So I've kind of just accepted that actually it is not something that it's important and it feels like a priority. But at the moment, I'm just going to have to park it. And I'll try and get bits and pieces done on it as and when I can. So if you're thinking, but that's not always the case, right? So sometimes you're thinking, okay, this is something I want to do, but I just haven't got the time for it. So I would just kind of gently challenge you to just check in. Is it completely true? Yeah. So for me, I do think for my book that is genuinely true. I am so busy and I am busy doing things that I need to be doing. Um, but it might be that maybe it's just not a priority right now, or that something else needs to be replaced. Okay. But have a think. Are you genuinely at capacity? And if so, the last thing I would suggest is to kind of push harder and do more. If you know me, you know that that's not my way. If you're at capacity, you can't do it. Okay. But if it's, maybe that I keep telling myself I haven't got time, but I am actually doing, I am procrastinating a lot. I am kind of doing other things. And the story that you're telling yourself is maybe not quite true, then maybe we need to kind of deal with those other blockers instead. All right. I just really wanted to make it clear that I'm not saying, on one hand, if you genuinely don't have the time, don't push through, don't work longer hours. You either need to find something that you can drop or accept that it needs to put on hold, but just challenge whether that definitely is true or not. Okay. So let's go into what helps. How are we doing for time? Good. So this is where we need to shift. All right. We don't want you to try and force yourself to do it. It doesn't work. Forcing yourself to do it just fails over and over again. What we need to do is try and create the conditions that make it more likely to happen. And a huge part of that, creating the conditions that you need is about reducing the pressure and the resistance that I've talked about before. Because if your nervous system is already under threat before you even begin, yeah, you're going to be on to a loser. So absolutely, we need to think about how we can kind of reduce that pressure. But that said, I do think we need to explore some practical strategies to those external blockers that I mentioned, so we can take a kind of two-pronged approach. I wrote down two-pronged approach, and I meant to look at. I'm not sure if that's a phrase. Did I make that up? Is that true? Two-pronged approach? Does that make sense? Anyway, so we go at it with the sort of emotional side of it, but also what's the kind of practical things that we can do. So I've got a couple of examples to show you. Some of them might work for you, some of them might not, and that's okay. Take what you can from it, think about how you might be able to adapt it perhaps to what works for you. Now, the first one is about reducing friction. So making it easier to start. Take away those things that are getting in the way. Okay. The first bullet point on here, you've probably heard a million times. It's kind of basic like ADHD 101, isn't it? Right. But it is worth remembering and reminding yourself because sometimes those things are, they become kind of cliches because they are true. And remembering that even something simple like post something on Instagram feels like, oh, it's not that big a deal. I've just got to post something on Instagram. But it's got a lot of steps and it's got a lot of decisions to be taken in there. And the sequencing, the deciding what happens when and what actually needs to happen. And then the decisions about, well, what am I actually going to do with that? How am I going to do it? There's a lot of different steps. So if your task on your to-do list is post on Instagram, your brain is going to go, nope, no, that's too much. I don't even know where to begin with it. So try and dump down, like have a just kind of do almost like a brain dump of all of the things that you think are coming up, the things that you need to do in order to post that thing on Instagram. What do I need to do? I need to do this, and this. I need to decide whether I'm going to make it a carousel or a reel. I need to, blah, 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 all of the things. And then it's not easy. It is difficult with ADHD, but then try and kind of work out almost, I think it's quite helpful to try and reverse engineer. Where do I want to end up with all of those steps? Where am I going to start? So what's point one? So that brings us to the second bullet point here, defining the starting point. And don't worry too much, about the detail of how you do all those other next things, but where do we start from? And then once you've done the first one, what's the next one? Yeah, I think there's a phrase, how do you eat an elephant? And it's bite by bite. I'm never very good at remembering those, but it's something like that. It's like let's not get overwhelmed by the whole thing. Let's break it down. Let's get started. And then scheduling it. Now, I'm a bit kind of I wasn't sure whether to put this one down. I was thinking about it backwards and forwards because just because it's in your diary or in your calendar doesn't mean it's going to happen. The number of times I've scheduled stuff and I've just ignored it and not done it is, unreal. It happens. It's not a fail-safe kind of option. But I've always found personally, and again, people that I've spoken to, that if it's written down and you've got a plan for when you're going to do it, it's more likely to happen than if it's just randomly on a list. Okay, so I'm not saying it's a perfect solution, just saying where can we kind of find little bits that make it slightly more likely to happen. So that's about getting started on it, about making it easier to start. Think about increasing the engagement. So we talked about boredom. If you've got a boring task, is there any way that you can make it less boring? Okay, we're not going to necessarily make it from boring to fun, but can we make it a bit less boring? Can we put some music on? Can you kind of change your environment? Can you go sit in a different room that just kind of mixes things up a bit? Light a nice candle that you like the smell of that's going to make you kind of want to stay sat at your desk, for example. Or if it's something you need to listen to, put it on your earbuds, go out for a walk while you're listening to it. How can you make it a little bit less boring? I sort of mentioned about changing like the room that you sit in, but maybe it's about going to work in a library or cafe or a co-working space. Co-working doesn't work for me because I go to these co-working spaces with people I know and end up just chatting to them the whole time and not getting anything done. But so this is what I'm saying, not all of these will work for everyone, but sometimes it's worth a try. Sometimes it's worth seeing what works, what makes it more likely to happen. And then another way to kind of try and increase the engagement in it is to gamify the task. Has anyone ever done those of you that are on the call now, have you ever done anything in terms of gamifying? So like making it a challenge in some way. It doesn't have to be huge. Sometimes it can just be, I'm going to sit down and and I'm going to see how many words I can get written in the next 5 minutes. It's really, really quite simple, but just a little bit of a challenge that makes your brain kind of switch on with it. Anyone ever done that? Let me know. Let me know in the chat and I'll come back to it. And then the final kind of practical strategy or under this heading is about creating structure. Now, structure is the thing that ADHD brains really, really need, but they really fight against. So we need to, I always talk in my coaching sessions, we talk about creating some kind of flexible structure. So I think, again, sort of someone mentioned earlier, if you tell yourself you have to do it, then it doesn't happen. Oh, sorry, let me just have a quick answer going back to the gamifying. Bingo grids instead of a to-do list. Oh, I like that, a bingo grid. I really, really like that one. Thank you for sharing that. So you can just kind of like tick it off. We've got some love hearts and smiles on that. So that's gone down well with other people as well. Thank you for sharing that. I might have to try that one. Instead of just having a to-do list written down, that's a bit boring to get off. Do it as bingo grids. And then you can kind of use it like a menu, can't you, of what you're going to do next and see it get filled up. Love it. What I was saying about structure, try and maybe, don't make it too rigid so that it's easy to kind of get annoyed with, I'm not going to do that now, but some kind of flexible structure. All right. And you can do that with accountability. So you can have like a kind of formal accountability buddy, maybe someone else who's, doing something similar to you, like at work, or if you're doing a course and they're also on the course as well, like you can pair up and say like, let's keep each other accountable. Let's meet up once a week and check where we've got to. It can be a bit more informal. It can just be literally just texting your partner or, brother or something like that says, oh, I'm going to get this done. I just want to tell you, don't need to do anything, but I just want to say it out loud that I'm going to get this done by the end of the week. So sort of, and say like, maybe can you just check in on me? Or, if you're working with a coach, then you can use them for accountability as well. Deadlines can work well again, alongside accountability. So say asking for those check-ins, like making those deadlines short. Okay, really, really important that it's not just like each, for the very end of the task, it needs to be done by here, but that part of the task needs to be done by this, and that part of the task needs to be done by this time. Yeah, and asking for check-ins again at work, maybe, there's no shame in saying, I'll just be helpful if I know you're going to ask me, so then I'm going to get that done. And then body doubling. Again, this is one of those things that works really well for some people, doesn't work well for other people. And some like doing it online. You can just do like a Zoom call with someone and you both just sit there in complete silence and you just say, right, I'm going to work on this. Okay, I'm going to work on this. Let's check in an hour and see how we got on. or in person, like in co-working, that kind of thing, as long as you're not going to get distracted by it. I know body doubling, there's quite a few different apps as well that you can use, and like memberships and things you can use for that. So have a think about whether that works. Before I move on, are there any questions from anybody or anything that anyone wants to share about these kind of tips? Just had a good couple of ideas so far. Anything anyone wants to ask me, I'll make sure there's time at the end. If not, I'll keep going. Just want to make sure I'm not just talking and all right, okay. So I mentioned deadlines just now, but I do want to make a kind of add a little caveat, because ADHD brains only see deadlines when they're right in front of us. And I think it was Russell Barkley again, who said about we are short-sighted when it comes to time. So if it's far in the future, we can't see it, it's blurry. And it isn't until it gets closer and closer that it comes into focus and we go, oh, there it is. There it is. It's tomorrow. There's the deadline. Okay. And that like last minute nature of working, the urgency often does work actually. And this is kind of the frustrating thing that we prove to ourselves, actually, that works for me. Sometimes we think though that that's the only way that works for me, and that's what I want to challenge a little bit. You stay up all night, you get it done, you hand in the assignment or the report, or you do the presentation, whatever it is that you've decided you're going to do, it gets done, you succeed, and you move on, and then you repeat the pattern next time. But it does come at a cost. Okay, and you know this, I'm sure, but I'm just going to kind of like highlight it to you. Working in that kind of last minute, high stress, cortisol activating environment has an impact on your health, your sleep, your relationships, all of that. Uh, or some of that, maybe not all of that, but will have an impact on some of those things, mental health, physical health. Sleep is so, so huge as well for ADHD. We need our sleep. And if you're doing things like staying up super late to get stuff done, then you are depleting that, and that makes your other ADHD symptoms even worse. And it's not always reliable, and sometimes it backfires. Sometimes you just can't get it done in the time, or sometimes, you get it done, but you could have done better, and then the self-criticism comes back in. So if you are relying on last minute pressure and you're thinking, well, that's the way it works for me, that's the only way it works, I would kind of like to ask you to think about how well it's actually working for you long term. All right. So what other things could you put in place instead of the urgency? I already asked this, so I'm just going to ask it again now I've said that. Is there anything else that anyone can think of, tips or ways that you work that work well for you? I'm going to look at the internal stuff in a minute, but any kind of, has anyone tried body doubling? Does that work for them? I'd say love the bingo tip. If not, we'll come back at the end and we might think of some more. Okay. So hopefully some helpful stuff there, some things to think about, and maybe take a note of, experiment with them, see if you can, adjust it to work for you. But as I mentioned at the start, this isn't just about strategies, it's about how you relate to yourself as well. Yeah. And this is the bit that the tips and the tricks and the hacks and the, the Instagram posts and the, all of that give you like how to, how to get it done. They're definitely worth considering, but it doesn't kind of cover this. And this deeper layer is really what's important to sort of unpick as well. If your brain is associating tasks with pressure, criticism, failure, shame, then it's going to change how safe those tasks feel to approach. The brain's going to see them as not being safe, and it just creates this cycle. So reducing that pressure genuinely lowers the barrier to starting. And look, it's a long-term strategy, yeah? Reducing the internal blockers. There's not a quick fix. I can't spend, we're already at past, sorry, I'm very nearly finished. But I don't have any time to, tell you how to stop being perfectionistic or self-critical. And it's also different for everyone. I'm going to come back to the chat in a minute. There are a few things to think about. All right, that I'd really encourage you to go away and have a think about. Understanding your patterns is the first one. And you can do that maybe by journaling or discussing it with other people that kind of, people, if you're in a Facebook group or ADHD community, the people who get it, talk about it, process it. Or, obviously with a coach, if you've got a coach, I'm not saying it's necessary to get a coach or that you need to work with me, but if it's an option for you, then that's a good place to start unpicking, and understanding what are your patterns, what are you doing. The next thing to think about is, as I said, reducing that pressure and unnecessary shame. Really hard to give a quick fix solution to it, but it is slow and steady. But it's kind of just having a word with yourself, yeah? Trying to create a pause before going straight into, oh, I've not done it again. Why did I not do it? Changing the way that you speak to yourself. And at first, you're always going to default, initially, not always, you're initially going to default to what you've been doing, which is getting annoyed with yourself. But now we've talked about it, and now, you're going to go away and think about it. Maybe you'll be a bit more aware that you're doing it. And then after a while, you might actually manage to get a bit of a pause in before you start beating yourself up. You'll still do it, but you've got a pause in. And it's really important to remember that it's a really kind of like long-term strategy, because then after a while longer, that pause just gets longer and longer. And before you allow that thought in of, oh, I'm stupid, I didn't do it again, instead, you go, right, I didn't do it. What was making it so hard for me to do it? What could I do differently to make it easier for myself rather than beat myself up? So reframing what's happening, and like I said, that happens over time. It might help to have some of those things written down, like what's making this hard right now? What could I do differently to make this easier for myself? Write them down somewhere on a post-it note so that you can think, no, that's what I need to be thinking about, not about how much of an idiot I am. And then we start sort of experimenting with the support instead of trying to, make yourself do it. As I said, it's not sustainable. What things could help? Be curious, ask other people, give some things a go, try it, review it, adapt it. And then this last one is a whole kind of a book, I think, in itself about building self-trust. And it's something that I think happens really, really commonly, especially with late diagnosed ADHDers. What do I mean by self-trust? Okay, in this context, it's kind of about knowing that you can support yourself effectively and you can get those things done without having to succumb to that external, or the internal, sorry, pressure or shame cycles, all of that. You can trust yourself that you can do it. And building that trust happens over time. Some of the things that can help are things like having realistic expectations. Again, huge with ADHD, we tend to really kind of overestimate what we can do and then get disappointed when we don't. Following through on smaller commitments. So rather than setting yourself a goal of, right, I'm going to write my book by the summer, setting yourself something like, I'm going to write 1 page every other day. So give yourself a bit of leeway to miss a day, because then what happens is your brain sees the success in the small things that you do. And it thinks, oh, actually, I can do it. And it starts to build confidence in yourself. And then that becomes that kind of positive cycle. So every time you set yourself a small, realistic goal that you then achieve, it helps you kind of go, oh, right, I can do it. I'll set myself another small, realistic goal. And then I go and do it. Yeah. And then another thing in terms of self-trust that you can do is experiment different, I've got that on that third bullet point there, but with different sort of ways of doing things without treating the failure as proof that you've messed it up or that you're broken, or, it's an experiment. Here's the data to work with. It didn't work out this time. What do I need to do differently next time? Be a bit more scientific with it. Okay, so hopefully I've got the message across that I just need to do it isn't the kind of way to force yourself to do things. And what we want to do is think about what could I do differently, sorry, to make this easier for myself. And I wonder how things might change if you really got on board with this. It's not you that's the problem. It's just that the approach hasn't been working. So we need a different approach. Okay. Thank you. So hopefully that's helped you understand a bit more about why it happens and given you a few ideas to try. But what I'd really, really encourage you to do, if you can, spend a bit of time reflecting on how this specifically shows up for you. I know I've not had it, it would have been good to have some gaps in here. But if you can go away, have a little look at this again, what gets in the way for you, what helps, all of that is going to look differently, is going to look different for different people. Okay, so have a think about that and maybe experiment with a few small changes. We're not trying to completely overhaul everything overnight, but just these small, gentle adjustments make things a little bit easier and more sustainable over time. And so, yeah, you might want to come back to it after a week or two and just kind of keep assessing it. If you want any support with that, I'm going to leave these up. I've got we can just do a one-off session. I've got an offer on for anyone who comes to these talks. You can book in for a chat on whether if you want to maybe do some longer term coaching or have a look at my coaching brochure there as well. I'll leave that up for a minute and then I'm going to head over to Q&A. I'm actually going to stop the recording there so that people can come on screen.